We continue our study of Ezekiel. We are in Ezekiel, the fifth chapter. And we've already seen the prophet being told by God to display something that is very unusual in our eyes, and of course was very unusual to them as well. But that's not where it ends as far as the unusual displays that God has the prophet to do. So we begin chapter 5, and he says, "And thou, son of man, take thee a sharp knife," the King James says. Other translations correctly say a sharp sword. That's the way the Hebrew text reads, a sharp sword. "Take thee as a barber's razor, and cause it to pass upon thine head and upon thy beard. Then take thee balances to weigh, and divide the hair." Now, have you ever seen somebody do that? Well, God told the prophet to do just that. Take a sharp sword, probably not a long sword like we see in the movies, but more of a broad sword, similar to what the Romans would use in length. So take that sharp sword, like a barber's razor. Make sure that thing is as sharp as it can be. And then shave off your head. Shave off your hair from your head. I have never had my head shaved. And I hope I never will. There may come a day where I have to. I've never had that experience. But Ezekiel was told to do that, not only his hair on his head, but his beard. Ezekiel had a beard. Now, we're not told if he had a mustache. We have to assume he did. Most Jewish men, most Israelite men who had a beard also had a mustache to go with it. So he was to shave off the hair on his face. And then he says, take balances and weigh the hair. Have you ever wondered how much your hair weighs? You know, some of us have more to deal with than others. I won't say who, and I won't say how much or how less. But I would guarantee you that if you took the weight of your hair off of your head and off of your body, it would make a big difference on your weight in most cases. But still, he was to take that and weigh it. Weigh the hair and divide it. Now you wonder, where's he going with this? He's going to explain here momentarily. "Thou shalt burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city, when the days of the siege are fulfilled." Now remember, he had told him the previous chapter to lay upon his side, one side for 390 days, and one side for 70 days. And so that's the length of the siege. So he is to burn with fire a third part of that hair in the middle of the city. That's Babylon, where he was. "When the days of the siege are fulfilled, and thou shalt take a third part," that is, of the hair that he has shaved off his head and his face, and he is weighed. "Take a third part and smite about it with a knife or the sword." In other words, take your sword, and like you do for food, just chop it. Chop, 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 like that. Just divide it with your sword. "And a third part shalt thou scatter in the wind, and I will draw out a sword after them." And you're wondering, what is this about? You know, he's to burn a third part of his hair, then he is to chop up another third part, and then a third part scatter in the wind. Verse 3, "Thou shalt also take thereof a few in number, and bind them in thy skirts." So in the midst of all this, take a little bit of the hair that sort of falls to itself and bind it in your skirt or in your clothing. That's unusual. "Then take of them again and cast them into the midst of the fire and burn them in the fire. For thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel." Now you see where he's going with it. "Even among the remnant," you see the hair that he binds within his clothing is the remnant that would survive all of what would happen to Jerusalem. the siege of Jerusalem. But even among the remnant, some would fall away. Even among those who left and went back to Jerusalem, there would be those who would not survive. Thus saith the Lord God. Now here's the explanation. This is Jerusalem. I have set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are round about her. They were chosen of God. By the way, later on in this same book, God is going to spell out in very detailed language what Israel's state was before God called her and why God called her. But just for now, know that He had set Jerusalem in the midst of the nations and countries that were round about her. And she hath changed or rebelled against my judgments into or in doing wickedness more than the nations, and my statutes more than the countries that are round about her. For they have refused my judgments and my statutes. They have not walked in them. Here's the problem. Here is the core problem that Israel and Jerusalem specifically had. The Gentiles had done a better job in following after God's moral law than did the Jews. What a commentary. What a commentary on the Israelites. He says the nations were doing better than Judah, than Jerusalem. Verse 7, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because you multiplied, the King James says, actually the text reads, you are turbulent more than the nations that are round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have kept my judgments, neither have done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about you. What does he mean when he says you are more turbulent than the nations that are round about? That is, you are more evil. You are more evil than the nations that are round about. That would be a slap in the face to all of those that were there in Jerusalem. They thought of themselves as God's chosen people. They were up here and all these nations were down here. God says, you're worse than all the nations that are around you because you have refused my judgments and my statutes. You have not walked in them. That's the problem. They were lawless. And we're going to see even more examples of this the further on that we go into this book. Verse 8, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I, even I, am against thee, and will execute judgments in the midst of thee in the sight of the nations. They had utterly failed to fulfill their mission that God had given them. And because of that, God is going to now bring judgment home to them. And I will do in thee that which I have not done, and whereunto I will not do any more the like, because of all thine abominations. Everything that you're doing, you're going to see things that I'm going to do. God is telling them that you've not seen before and you will not see again. They had gotten that evil. Verse 10, therefore the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers. And I will execute judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into all the winds. What's he talking about? He's talking about what would happen when the siege of Jerusalem would take place. When Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian armies would lay siege to the city for an extended period of time, things would become so dire and so desolate for the city that they would resort to cannibalism. And that is a horrible thing. And that wouldn't be the last time that that would happen in Jerusalem, by the way. Because when the Romans in AD 70 would lay siege to the city, Josephus tells us that that is exactly what happened among many of the families that remained in the city. Verse 11, wherefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, surely, because thou hast defiled my sanctuary with all thy detestable things, and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any pity. Now we get a glimpse into the worst part of all of this. It's not just that they have defied the law of God. It's not just that they have walked in their own ways and not walked after God's judgments. It's not just that they were worse in their conduct than the nations round about them. No, it says, you have defiled my sanctuary. You've defiled my temple with what? All your detestable things and all your abominations. That gives us a hint that there's something even worse afoot. And we're going to see that in all of its spectacle later on as we go through this book. Verse 12. Now he begins the explanation of the prophecy, what he had given to Ezekiel, the first of this chapter. A third part of these shall die with the pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. So that's what it means when in verse 2 he says, you'll burn with fire a third part. And a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee. So that explains why he was to take the sword and cut the hair. And I will scatter a third part into all the winds. Thus explaining why he was to take the hair and scatter it to the wind. And I will draw out a sword after them. Thus shall mine anger be accomplished. And I will cause my fury to rest upon them. And I will be comforted. And they shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it in my zeal when I have accomplished my fury in them. You know, when God starts talking this kind of language, you better sit up and take notice. When he starts talking about his fury and his zeal, something's about to happen. God has long suffering, God has patience, but that long suffering and patience has its limit. And so we today need to be careful that we don't test the patience of our God. Our God is long suffering, our God is loving and merciful. But as Paul said in the book of Romans, behold therefore the goodness and the severity of God. Toward them which fail severity, but toward thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. There are two sides of God. There's his mercy and his judgment. We must always never test God's judgment. That's what Israel had done, and it had reached its limit with the Lord. Moreover, I will make thee waste and a reproach among the nations that are round about thee, in the sight of all that pass by. This is a warning that's being given to his people. So it shall be a reproach and a taunt, an instruction and an astonishment unto the nations that are round about thee, when I shall execute judgments in thee in anger and in fury and in furious rebukes. I, the Lord, have spoken it. He says it's going to happen. It's going to happen because of your disobedience, because of your stubbornness, because you have determined to go your way instead of my way. Then I'm going to send my anger, my fury, my furious rebukes. It's as sure as shooting, as we would say down here in Alabama. It's as sure as anything. Verse 16, when I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and will break your staff of bread. So they're going to be have the scourge of pestilence and of famine. They're not going to have the basics, the necessities to get by. So will I send upon you famine and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee, and pestilence, that's disease, and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. I, the Lord, have spoken it. You know, today the church needs to be warned. When the Lord, through the pen of John, told the 7 churches of Asia what he told them, you recall that only 2 of those congregations did not receive a rebuke from the Lord. The other 5 received some sort of rebuke, whether it was complete and total rebuking and no commendation, or some things that needed to be corrected. He gave them the warning that he could remove his candlestick or remove his lampstand from among them. There comes a point in the life of a congregation where it gets so far away from the Lord and His Word that the Lord removes His candlestick. Now, when can we know when that happens? I don't know if we can actually know or perceive it. We can guess. But when a congregation determines to go its own way instead of the Lord's way, then it really has some dire consequences. And we have seen over the years the bitter fruits of all of that. And so the church as a whole needs to be warned, just as the people of God were warned by the prophet in this day. Now he comes to chapter 6. And the prophecy is now extended not just to the city of Jerusalem, but to all Israel. Notice, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face toward the mountains of Israel, and prophesy against them. So now he's going to prophesy to the mountains. He's prophesying to mountains. Why is he prophesying to mountains? Because those were the places, especially, where Israel practiced idolatry. And they didn't think the Lord knew about it. Oh, the Lord knew exactly what they were doing. Verse 3, and say, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains, and to the hills, to the rivers, and to the valleys. Behold, I, even I, will bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. There's the problem. There's the problem. The problem's not in the mountains and the rivers and the valleys. That's not the problem. The problem is what they were doing in the mountains, what they were doing beside the rivers, what they were doing in the valleys. They had their high places, their sites of Baal worship that Jeremiah talked about in Jeremiah 2:23, where many times, according to Isaiah 57:5, they would offer up children as sacrifice to their gods. That's how far Israel had gone. They were offering their children in sacrifice to idols. So he says he's going to bring a sword upon you. What is that sword? That sword is the armies of Nebuchadnezzar that would sweep in. That's what would destroy all the high places. And verse 4, your altars shall be desolate, and your images shall be broken. That phrase in the Hebrew is actually sun images. They were worshiping the sun. These sun images were pillars or obelisks, and these pillars or obelisks were connected with the worship of Baal, and not just worshiping the idol Baal, it was also connected with rank immorality. They had constructed these things in the mountains and beside the rivers and in the valleys. And they shall be broken, he says. And I will cast down your slain men before your idols. Now, the King James uses the word idol here. The Hebrew text actually has the word that means dung heaps. In other words, I will cast down your slain men before your dung heaps. That's the way the Lord looked at all of that. He looked at these places of idolatry as no better than a dung heap. And in fact, this phrase is used 31 times in this book alone. Dung heaps. The Lord just thought of it as rank immorality. Verse 6, in all, or verse 5 that is, and I will lay the dead carcasses of the children of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones round about your altars. You remember King Josiah, the youngest king to take the throne in Judah? When he became of age, the law of the Lord was found in the temple. It had been lost all those years. And it was read in his hearing, and he began to tear at his clothes, and he said, "We are gone. We've transgressed the Lord." And he determined to have a restoration movement in the nation of Judah, which he did in earnest. He began to tear down all the idols. He began to tear down all the high places. He even went so far as to go into the cemeteries of the apostates that led Israel to sin and began to desecrate their graves to send a signal to anybody who wanted to follow after them. Tragically, Josiah was cut down right in the midst of all of that. He could not institute a sweeping and thorough restoration of everything in Judah. But what the Lord is proposing to do here, through the armies of Nebuchadnezzar, is to purge out all of that sin. Verse 6, "In all your dwelling places the city shall be laid waste, and the high places shall be desolate, that your altars may be laid waste and made desolate, and your idols may be broken and cease, and your images may be cut down, and your works may be abolished." There is what he's after. Getting rid of all that idolatry, getting rid of all that immorality, getting rid of all of that paganism. That has been the scourge of Israel from the very first. When they left Egypt, they had idols with them when they left Egypt and went over to the promised land. And according to the prophet, they had idols in their heart even after they came in to the land of Canaan. And it's all been the problem ever since. And this is how the Lord is dealing with it. "And the slain shall fall in the midst of you, and ye shall know that I am the Lord." You better get used to that phrase. You're going to see it a lot in this book. "You shall know that I am the Lord. The nations shall know that I am the Lord. They shall know that I am the Lord" is used 60 times in this book. 60 times. You're going to see it over and over and over. "They shall know that I am the Lord. Yet will I leave a remnant, that ye may have some that shall escape the sword among the nations, when you shall be scattered through the countries." They would be penitent, this remnant. They would find their way back to Judea. This remnant would come back. And Ezekiel's going to be talking about that even more later on in this book in some very famous imagery that you're going to see. "And they that escape of you shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be carried captives, because I am broken with their whorish heart." The Hebrew text actually reads, "I have broken with their whorish heart, which hath departed from me, and with their eyes which go a-whoring after their idols. And they shall loathe themselves for the evils which they have committed in all their abominations." Israel, in other words, is going to be crushed. It's going to be crushed because of its sin. But out of that crushing would come a small remnant who would want to remain faithful to God and who would remain faithful to God. "And they shall know that I am the Lord, and that I have not said in vain that I would do this evil unto them. Thus saith the Lord God, Smite with thine hand, and stamp with thy foot, and say, Alas, for all the evil abominations of the house of Israel, for they shall fall by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence." Here's another thing that's unusual for a prophet. He says, clap with your hand and stomp your foot. That gets your attention. That get anybody's attention. Somebody in the midst of a big place where there's a lot of people, he starts clapping his hands, stomping his foot. You want to know, what's he doing that for? That would draw attention to him where he could then declare the Lord's message. This is expressing grief. Clapping and stomping in this context is expressing grief. You're grieving. Why? Because of the abominations that Israel has done. He that is far off shall die the pestilence, and he that is near shall fall by the sword. And he that remaineth and is besieged shall die by the famine. Thus will I accomplish my fury upon them. Then shall you know that I am the Lord, when their slain men shall be among their idols round about their altars, upon every high hill, in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savor to all their idols. Now we get a little bit of insight as to what they were doing, where they were doing it. They were doing it upon every high hill, at the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, under every thick oak. This is indicative of the fact that some of the Israelites were worshiping fertility goddesses. Fertility goddesses, which had in connection with the worship of that rampant immorality. So will I stretch out my hand upon them and make the land desolate, yea, more desolate than the wilderness toward Diblath, in all their habitations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Now, we don't really know where Diblath is. Not really sure where that location is. But wherever it was desolate. That wilderness area was extremely desolate. He says it's going to be even worse than that. They shall know that I am the Lord. That brings us then to chapter 7. We'll get as far as we can into it before we end. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Also thou son of man, thus saith the Lord God unto the land of Israel, the end is come upon the four corners of the land. Not just an end, the end. This is a standard announcement of doom, and it's in connection with God's people. It's comparing the end of Israel to the final judgment. It's that certain. Now is the end come upon thee, and I will send mine anger upon thee, and will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense upon thee all thine abominations. And mine eye shall not spare thee, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense thy ways upon thee, and thine abominations shall be in the midst of thee, and you shall know that I am the Lord. They're going to reap what they have sown, and it has been abominable. Thus saith the Lord God, and evil, and only evil, behold, is come. This evil, in other words, is without precedent. Without precedent. An end is come. The end is come. It watcheth for or awaketh against thee. Behold, it is come. This judgment has been long slumbering, but it's now awake. You don't awaken a sleeping giant. God's been awakened. His judgment is now awakened. The morning, the King James says, or thy doom is come upon thee, O thou that dwellest in the land. The time is come. The day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again of the mountains. It's tumult coming. Now will I shortly pour out my fury upon thee, and accomplish mine anger upon thee, and I will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense thee for all thine abominations. And mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. I will recompense thee according to thy ways and thine abominations that are in the midst of thee, and you shall know that I am the Lord that smiteth. The Hebrew text literally means Jehovah will destroy. It's one of the names given to God. Jehovah will destroy. Behold the day, behold it is come. The morning, or thy doom is gone forth. The rod hath blossomed. Pride hath budded. Pride. That's one of the problems, one of the many problems Israel and Judah had. Violence is risen up into a rod of wickedness. He's talking here of Israel. None of them shall remain, nor of their multitude, nor of any of theirs, neither shall there be wailing for them. It's total judgment. The time is come, the day draweth near. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. All these activities would end. It is so certain. For the seller shall not return to that which is sold, although they were yet alive. For the vision is touching the whole multitude thereof, which shall not return. Neither shall any strengthen himself in the iniquity of his life. Everything's going to belong to the Chaldeans. When Nebuchadnezzar comes in with his armies, everything's going to belong to them. Nobody's going to be able to do any regular commerce anymore, in other words. They have blown the trumpet, even to make all ready, but none goeth to the battle. For my wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. Judah's military is going to be impotent. They can't answer the call to battle. The sword is without, and the pestilence and the famine within. He that is in the field shall die with the sword, and he that is in the city, famine and pestilence shall devour him. But they that escape of them shall escape. Here's the remnant he's talking about. And shall be on the mountains like doves of the valleys, all of them mourning, every one for his iniquity. All hands shall be feeble, and all knees shall be weak as water. They would be powerless before the Babylonians. They would not be able to stand against Nebuchadnezzar and his armies. They shall also gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all faces, and baldness upon all their heads. Because of their evil, they just can't stand. There's no way they can stand up against them. They shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their souls, neither fill their bowels, because it is the stumbling block of their iniquity. Their wealth can't deliver them from this day. They're not going to be able to buy their way out of this. No way at all. As for the beauty of his ornament, he set it in majesty. But they, that's the Israelites, made the images of their abominations and of their detestable things therein. Therefore I have set it far from them, or made it as an unclean thing. What they did with the silver and the gold that God had given them, they had made it into idols and abominable images that they then turned around and worshipped. As for the beauty of his ornament, or verse of 21, and I will give it into the hands of the strangers for a prey, and to the wicked of the earth for a spoil, and they shall pollute it. My face will I turn also from them, and they shall pollute my secret place. That's the temple. For the robber shall enter into it and defile it. Nebuchadnezzar and his armies would come right into the temple, they would defile it, and they would completely destroy Solomon's temple. Make a chain. Now he turns to the prophet. So make a chain. For the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. This chain would represent the fact that the people of Israel, the people of Jerusalem, would be led into Babylonian captivity. Wherefore I will bring the worst of the heathen, and they shall possess their houses, talking about the Chaldeans who would come in with Nebuchadnezzar. I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace, and they shall see none. There shall be none. Nebuchadnezzar, when he came in, would insist upon a complete and total destruction of Jerusalem and of the temple. Now you recall when we studied Daniel, this was the aftermath. Daniel was set in the aftermath of all of this. And Daniel would then strike up a relationship with Nebuchadnezzar and eventually bring this pagan ruler, this man who is ruthless and brutal, he would eventually bring him over to worshiping the one true God. But that would be many years later. At present, this is what's going to take place. Mischief shall come upon mischief, and rumor shall be upon rumor. Then shall they seek a vision of the prophet, but the law shall perish from the priest, and counsel from the ancients. Every avenue of spiritual help will be shut down. Shut off. They won't be able to consult anyone for spiritual help. It's too late. It's too late for all of that. The king shall mourn, and the prince shall be clothed with desolation, and the hands of the people of the land shall be troubled. I will do unto them after their way, and according to their deserts will I judge them. And they shall know that I am the Lord. There's the focus. They shall know that I am the Lord. All classes of people will be dismayed and troubled because of this. And it all gets back to the fact that Israel had sinned. Judah had sinned. Jerusalem had sinned. They had had warning after warning after warning after warning given to them by all the prophets that God had sent. And they would either kill those prophets or laugh at those prophets. And now Ezekiel is being sent, and he's telling them what's going to happen because of all of what they have done. And the scope and the extent of this abomination, the scope and the extent of this disobedience is mind-blowing. We've already seen up to this point in chapter 7, God describing how extensive this has become. And he's talking about where all of this idol worship and all of this immorality has taken place, in the mountains and by the rivers and in the valleys. It's extensive all through the nation of Judah. It's permeated every class of people, even the religious classes of people. But you ain't seen nothing yet. Forgive the bad grammar. But when we get into chapter 8 next week, that's going to begin Ezekiel's journey to Jerusalem. Ezekiel journeyed to Jerusalem, not physically, but in a vision. Spiritually speaking, he went to Jerusalem. And what he saw was unbelievable. And when we get there next week, I hope that you're as astonished as I am. You remember the glory of the Lord that we saw with Ezekiel by the river Kibar in chapter 1? It is present in Jerusalem right as Ezekiel is speaking here. And you're going to see it in chapters 8 through 11. And what happens with that glory of the Lord is just unreal. But we'll do that next week.